White cops frame black woman, unaware she's a CIA agent. The truth explodes in court. Late at night in a quiet Virginia town, two police officers pulled over a black woman, accusing her of a crime she didn't commit. What should have been a routine stop quickly spiraled into something far more sinister, a carefully orchestrated setup. But what these officers didn't know was that their target wasn't just anyone. She was someone with the power to dismantle everything they thought they controlled. This story takes a shocking turn, unraveling a web of lies and corruption, culminating in a courtroom revelation so explosive it would shake the entire police department to its core. The setup. The streets of Arlington, Virginia were nearly deserted, the glow of streetlights flickering over empty sidewalks. Talia Porter sat behind the wheel of her sleek black SUV, her hands steady on the wheel as she navigated the quiet roads. It was just past midnight. The day had been long, but she felt a sense of closure. Her undercover work in this town was nearly done, and soon she'd make her exit. At a deserted intersection, she slowed to a stop, her sharp eyes catching the reflective glow of a stop sign. Talia had an instinct for details, a skill honed over years as a field operative. She came to a complete stop, then turned left onto the next street. Seconds later, flashing blue and red lights filled her rearview mirror. The wail of a siren cut through the silence. Talia exhaled slowly, her pulse steady. This wasn't fear. She didn't scare easily. Instead, her mind sharpened. She signaled, pulled to the side of the road, and cut the engine. With practiced calm, she reached for her glove compartment, retrieving her license and registration. Behind her, a patrol car idled. Two officers emerged, their movements deliberate. The driver, a tall man with a square jaw, approached first. His name tag read, Carter. His partner, shorter and stockier, lingered behind him, Sullivan. "Evening, ma'am," Carter said, shining his flashlight into her car. The beam swept across her face, then the interior. "You know why I pulled you over?" Talia met his gaze evenly. "No, officer," she said, her voice calm. "I wasn't speeding, and I made a full stop at the intersection." Carter's lips curled into a smirk. "Actually," he said, "you rolled through that stop sign. That's a moving violation." Talia's brow lifted slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm certain I stopped." "License and registration," Carter interrupted, his voice turning hard. Without hesitation, she handed him the documents, her movements slow and deliberate. She wasn't interested in escalating the situation. Carter examined her license, his eyes lingering. His expression shifted subtly, as though processing something. "Virginia plates, local address," he muttered, then louder. "You live around here?" "Yes, officer," Talia replied evenly. From the back of her vehicle, Sullivan suddenly called out, "Hey, Carter, you might want to see this." Carter straightened, his gaze flicking toward his partner. Without another word, he handed back her documents. "Stay in the car," he ordered before striding toward the rear of the SUV. Talia watched through the side mirror, her jaw tightening. Sullivan pointed at something in her trunk, his voice low, conspiratorial. Carter nodded, the two exchanging a glance that sent a ripple of warning through her chest. It wasn't fear. It was instinct. Seconds later, Carter returned to her window, his expression dark. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Talia tilted her head slightly. Her voice remained cool. "May I ask why, officer?" "We have reason to believe you're in possession of illegal substances," Carter said, his tone clipped, almost rehearsed. Her eyes narrowed. "Illegal substances?" she repeated, her voice edged with quiet steel. "I think you've made a mistake." "We'll see about that," Carter said, gesturing for her to exit. Sullivan stood by the trunk, a smug expression plastered across his face. Suppressing a sigh, Talia unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she had all the time in the world. She walked toward the back of her SUV and looked at the scene before her. A small, unmarked bag sat conspicuously near the edge of the trunk. Sullivan crossed his arms, feigning surprise. Well, he drawled. "What do you know? A bag of powdery goodness. Talia's gaze flicked to the bag, then back to the officers. Her face remained unreadable. Inside, though, her mind was racing, cataloging every detail. They had planted it, and they were damn sure she had no way out. What they didn't know? Talia. Porter wasn't just a woman driving home late at night, she was a CIA agent, and she was about to turn their world upside down. The bag hadn't been there when she left home. Talia was certain of it. This was a setup. Carter stepped closer, his smirk widening. "Anything you want to tell us, ma'am?" Talia's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, a calculated expression revealing nothing. "I'll save my comments for the appropriate setting," Carter chuckled, mistaking her calm for arrogance. "Oh, you'll have your chance. You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Sullivan moved to cuff her. Talia didn't resist. Her gaze remained steady, unflinching. "You're making a big mistake," she said, her voice low, measured. There was no plea, no fear, just a quiet certainty that made Sullivan hesitate for half a second before snapping the cuffs into place. "Yeah, we'll see," Carter muttered, leading her to the squad car. "Let's see how confident you are in front of a judge." As they drove away, Talia gazed out the window, her mind already working through the angles. The officers thought they had an easy arrest. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The ride to the station, tense silence filled the patrol car. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Talia sat motionless in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her. The glow of streetlights flickered across her face, but her expression remained neutral, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Internally, her mind worked like a machine, replaying every moment, every detail. The stop sign that wasn't there. The smug certainty in the officer's eyes. The conveniently placed bag. This wasn't sloppy corruption. It was calculated, rehearsed. Carter glanced at her through the rearview mirror, smirking. "You don't seem too worried." His voice dripped with mockery, baiting her. Talia met his eyes through the mirror, unblinking. "Should I be?" Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "You're either brave or stupid, lady. I've seen a lot of people act tough, but it never lasts long in the holding cell." Talia didn't respond. She didn't need to. Men like Carter lived for power, bending the rules to their advantage, walking away without consequences. For now, she let him believe he was in control. That illusion wouldn't last. The station, the Yahweh precinct was quiet when they arrived. Night shift officers lounged behind their desks, sipping coffee and murmuring in low voices. The air smelled of stale paperwork and old linoleum. Carter and Sullivan marched her inside, their voices loud, brash. "Got ourselves a big one tonight," Carter called out, his tone thick with self-satisfaction. Heads turned. Sullivan swaggered to the counter and tossed the bag of powder onto it with a theatrical flourish. "Caught her red-handed," he said, grinning. "Looks like she's been running more than stop signs." Talia remained silent, her eyes scanning the room. She took in everything: camera placements, desk arrangements, the subtle hierarchy among the officers. It was a small station, the kind where everyone knew everyone. A web of shared secrets and quiet corruption. They led her to the fingerprinting station. Carter removed the cuffs and motioned for her to place her hands on the ink pad. She complied. Without resistance, her movements controlled. The officer working the station was younger, with tired eyes. He hesitated for a fraction of a second as he glanced at her, as though sensing something wasn't right. "Name?" he asked, his tone almost apologetic. "Talia Porter," she answered evenly. "Occupation?" She paused, just for a beat. Then, "Consultant." Vague, but true. The officer nodded, typing it in, but his unease was obvious. Carter and Sullivan, oblivious, leaned against the counter, laughing quietly. Talia spoke, her voice slicing through their amusement. "You're sure about this?" The laughter stopped. Both men turned toward her, their smugness faltering for the briefest second. "You've got a smart mouth," Carter said, his tone darkening. "Let's see how funny you are after a night in lockup." The door, slammed shut behind her. The cell was cold and dimly lit. A metal bench bolted to the wall offered little comfort. The bars cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Talia sat down, her back straight, posture unyielding. Carter lingered by the bars, watching her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "You don't look like the type to get mixed up in this kind of thing," he mused. "But don't worry, the courts love a good sob story. Maybe they'll go easy on you." Talia tilted her head slightly, meeting his gaze without a hint of hesitation. "Or maybe they'll see through yours." For the first time that night, Carter's confidence wavered. He muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving her alone in the cell. Talia exhaled slowly, her mind already assembling the next move. She had everything she needed. This wasn't just about getting out. This was about bringing them down. And when the truth came out, Carter and Sullivan would wish they'd never pulled her over. Talia knew she had to be precise. This wasn't just about her freedom. It was about exposing something much bigger. The hum of the station's HVAC system was the only sound in her cell. She sat still, waiting. Patience was second nature to her. She knew her absence wouldn't go unnoticed for long, and when it was, there would be questions. Her team would find her. They always did. Until then, she played the part. The calm detainee, the unremarkable woman with nothing to hide. But every passing moment was an opportunity. She tracked the officers' movements, memorized their routines, listened to the crackle of the radio. Every detail mattered. In the break room, Carter and Sullivan leaned back with steaming mugs of coffee, their laughter filling the space. "She thinks she's untouchable," Sullivan scoffed, shaking his head. "Did you see her face? Not even a flicker of panic." Carter smirked. "Yeah, well, that'll change. She's just another name in the system now. Nobody's going to dig too deep." Nearby, the young processing officer, James Keller, lingered, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. Something about this case felt wrong. Talia Porter wasn't like the others. She wasn't scared, wasn't angry, just watching, calculating. And the drugs? Too convenient, sitting in the trunk like a perfectly wrapped gift. Keller glanced up at the surveillance monitors. There she was, unmoving, unreadable. His gut twisted. He knew better than to question senior officers, but still. In her cell, Talia shifted slightly, pressing a small hidden tracker in the hem of her jacket. A silent signal pulsed outward, a beacon reaching her team. She didn't need to speak. They would know what to do. Carter and Sullivan, oblivious, chuckled over their coffee. "She probably thinks she's going to outsmart us," Carter said, shaking his head. "They always do." Sullivan chuckled. "She's in for a rude awakening. The case is airtight. We've got the drugs, the arrest report. No witnesses. Nobody's coming to save her." Carter leaned back, grinning. "You know what I love about this job? The predictability. They always think they're smarter than us, but they never are." A few miles away, a phone vibrated softly on a desk. A hand reached for it. "Signal received," a voice said, calm and precise. "Location confirmed. Deploying resources." Back in her cell, Talia exhaled slowly, a faint smile playing at her lips. The kind of smile that wasn't about amusement, but certainty. The officers thought they had her. They had no idea what was coming. For Carter and Sullivan, today felt like a victory lap. For Talia Porter, it was just the beginning. She sat motionless in her holding cell, composed as ever. Through the bars, she caught glimpses of the station's activity, the occasional, passing shadow snippets of conversation, but she remained focused. She knew how to disappear into the background when necessary, how to be invisible until the exact moment visibility mattered most. Her signal had been sent hours ago. Her team would come, but not yet. Timing was everything. In the meantime, she needed to plant seeds of doubt. At the front desk, Officer James Keller's eyes flicked toward the holding cell monitors again. Talia hadn't moved much since her arrival, but something about her demeanor unsettled him. It wasn't fear, it wasn't defiance, it was patience, confidence, and it didn't make sense. Unable to shake his unease, Keller pulled up her file. Name, address, driver's license, all standard. But then, an anomaly. An employment history. Gap. Her most recent job was listed as independent consultant with no further details. Frowning, Keller minimized the file and glanced toward the break room, where Carter and Sullivan were laughing over donuts, their carefree demeanor making his stomach churn. Against his better judgment, he clicked into the arrest report. Stopped for failure to yield at an intersection. Driver exhibited nervous behavior during questioning. Consent to search granted. Controlled substances found in the trunk. Keller exhaled sharply. It followed procedure. On paper it was clean, but it felt too neat, too scripted. As the hours passed, he found himself pacing near the holding cells, glancing toward Talia with increasing frequency. Finally, he stopped just outside her bars. "Miss Porter," he said. She looked up, dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Yes?" Keller hesitated, hand resting on his belt. "Did you really consent to the search of your car?" Talia tilted her head, studying him. She saw the doubt in his eyes, the cracks forming. "What do you think, Officer Keller?" she asked, her tone calm but pointed. Keller swallowed hard. I'm just doing my job." "That's what they're counting on," Talia said evenly. "Men like Carter and Sullivan, they rely on people like you to look the other way." Keller's face flushed. He took a step back, muttered something, unintelligible, then retreated down the hall. But Talia had seen it, the hesitation in his step, the conflict written across his face. The seed had been planted. Miles away, in the heart of Arlington, a plain black sedan rolled to a stop outside a nondescript building. Inside, a man in a tailored suit stepped out, flanked by 2 agents. Their movements were smooth, professional. "ETA on extraction?" one agent asked as they entered the building. The man checked his watch. "We move when she gives the signal. For now, we watch." Inside a secure operations room, live feeds from the police station flickered across multiple monitors. One showed Talia in her cell, still as a statue. Another displayed the front desk, where Keller paced, clearly agitated. "Looks like the kid's starting to crack," one agent observed. "Good," the suited man replied. "We'll use it when the time comes." Back at the station, Carter leaned back in his chair, sipping his 3rd cup of coffee. "You see, Keller earlier," he said to Sullivan. "Kid looked like he'd seen a ghost." Sullivan smirked, shaking his head. "Fresh out of the academy, they always get jumpy around their first big case." Carter exhaled, gaze darkening. "Yeah, well, let's hope he doesn't start asking too many questions." Sullivan shrugged. "Doesn't matter. The evidence is all there." But they didn't know. The clock was ticking. She's got no alibi. Even if Keller gets nosy, there's nothing he can prove. Carter nodded, but for the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. It hadn't occurred to him before, but now he considered the possibility. Doubt could be contagious. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in the station shifted. It was subtle, an almost imperceptible change in the air, but Talia felt it. The tension, the weight of something unspoken. She knew her team was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Keller's footsteps echoed down the hall again. Slower, this time. He paused outside her cell, conflicted. "You said they're counting on people like me," he said quietly. "What did you mean by that?" Talia's gaze was steady. "You know exactly what I mean." She let the words settle before delivering the real question. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Keller held her stare for a long moment, then turned and walked away, shoulders tense. In the operations room, the suited man watched Keller's retreat on the monitor. A faint smile played at his lips. "He's close," he murmured. One of the agents glanced at him and the man's smile widened. "One more push," he said. "Then we turn this whole thing upside down." Keller sat at his desk, fingers drumming, against the edge as he stared at his monitor. Talia Porter's file was still open, but the words blurred as his mind churned. The knot in his chest tightened. The feeling had been there since the arrest. Something wasn't right. He glanced toward the break room. Carter and Sullivan were still laughing, oblivious, their ease grating against his growing unease. The station felt heavier than usual, the walls pressing in, silent witnesses to something wrong. His thoughts drifted back to the holding cell. That's what they're counting on. Her voice had been calm, deliberate, like she knew exactly what buttons to press. And maybe she did. But was she wrong? The question gnawed at him. Hours passed, and doubt hardened into quiet resolve. He needed answers. But if he drew attention to himself, he'd be isolated. A rookie, questioning senior officers? He'd be labeled a problem. So he waited. When Carter and Sullivan finally left the room, he slipped into the records archive. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows. Keller logged into the system, hands trembling slightly, and searched past cases tied to Carter and Sullivan. Their names popped up repeatedly. Minor traffic violations escalating into drug charges. The same vague justifications. Nervous behavior. Consent to search. Controlled substances found. The pattern was unmistakable. And the defendants? Mostly people of color. Most convicted. Keller exhaled, his grip tightening on the desk. The knot in his chest had turned to something else now. Something heavier. In her cell, Talia remained still, composed. She had trained for moments like this, when waiting was the hardest part. Through the bars, she saw Keller's shadow move past slower now. Deliberate. She could sense it. The war inside him. He was close. She shifted slightly, just enough to catch his attention. He stopped. Turned. "Officer Keller," she said, her voice soft, but commanding. He hesitated, gripping the edge of the wall like a lifeline. "What?" His voice was low, defensive. "You've seen something, haven't you?" she asked, tilting her head. "Something that doesn't add up." Keller swallowed hard. "I can't—" He stopped, voice catching. "I'm just trying to do my job." Talia's expression didn't waver. "And what is your job exactly?" "To follow orders," he muttered. To look the other way?" she pressed. "Even when you know something's wrong?" Keller's jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward the hallway, scanning for witnesses. "You don't understand how things work around here." Talia's gaze was steady. "I understand more than you think. I know what it's like to feel trapped, to think you don't have a choice." She leaned forward slightly. "But you do, Keller. You always have a choice." His breath hitched. For a long moment he said nothing, then he turned and walked away. But her words followed him. At his desk, his fingers hovered over his keyboard, hesitating. He stared at the list of cases tied to Carter and Sullivan, his stomach twisting with each new name. Finally, he made a decision. Keller opened a secure email channel. His fingers moved faster now, resolve hardening. Then he attached the files and hit send. Keller attached the case files he had uncovered, his fingers hovering over the keyboard for a split second before typing. "To whom it may concern, there's something wrong in this station. I don't know who else to turn to. Please help." He hit send. His heart pounded as the message vanished into the void. He had no idea who would receive it, or if anyone would care. But it was a step. The first real step toward doing what he knew was right. In the break room, Carter leaned back in, his chair, coffee cup balanced on his knee. "You notice Keller acting weird today?" he asked, shooting a glance at Sullivan. Sullivan shrugged. "Kid's always weird. What's he gonna do? Rat us out?" Carter smirked, but his eyes narrowed. "Still, keep an eye on him. Last thing we need is some rookie sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." That afternoon, as the station buzzed with routine activity, a black sedan rolled into the lot. Unmarked, unassuming. Inside, Talia's team made final preparations. They had intercepted Keller's email. Now, They had everything they needed. "Keep it clean," their leader murmured, adjusting his tie. "No unnecessary disruptions. We exposed this from the inside." The car doors opened. Sunlight caught the edges of their badges. FBI. Inside her cell, Talia smiled faintly as the station doors swung open. She couldn't see them from where she sat. She didn't need to. Her team had arrived. The storm wasn't brewing anymore. It was here. The usual hum of the station faltered into an uneasy silence as the agents stepped inside. Crisp black suits. Measured movements. Badges gleaming under fluorescent lights. The lead agent, a tall man with graying hair and a sharp, unreadable expression, approached the front desk. His eyes swept the room with quiet authority. Nearby, Keller froze mid-typing. His pulse spiked. Fear, relief, both. He watched as the agent leaned in, speaking low enough that surrounding officers couldn't hear. The desk sergeant, a burly man with a gruff demeanor, straightened, his hand instinctively brushing against the radio on his shoulder. "What's this about?" he asked, voice wary. The agent's response was steady, clipped. "Federal investigation. We need access to your records and holding cells. Immediately." A flicker of hesitation. A glance exchanged with a nearby officer. The FBI's sudden arrival was unexpected, disruptive. But denying them? There was no protocol for that. The sergeant exhaled sharply. "Fine," he gestured toward the hallway. "Follow me." From his desk, Keller watched it all unfold, palms slick with sweat. This was because of him. He hadn't expected a response so fast, or so public. Near, the break room Carter and Sullivan had gone still. Their easy laughter had been replaced by hushed whispers, their postures tense. Carter's eyes found Keller's. For a split second, they locked gazes. Keller looked away first, forcing his focus back to his screen. But the station felt different now. The air had changed. The weight of something inevitable pressing in. Agent Daniel Price led his team into a dimly lit interrogation room. No wasted movements. No wasted time. A second agent wheeled in a cart loaded with a portable server and several hard drives. Within seconds, they were plugged into the station's network, pulling records, combing through files. Price leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching as lines of code and case files scrolled across the monitor. "Anything?" he asked. The tech agent, a younger woman with sharp eyes, barely glanced up. "Plenty." She tapped the screen. "These case files are riddled with inconsistencies, repeated arrests, identical narratives, gaps in procedure." She paused. "This isn't just bad policing, it's systemic." Price's jaw tightened. "Pull everything, every record, every report, every piece of evidence tied to those two." In her cell, Talia sat motionless, listening to the shift in the air. The waiting was almost over. She flexed her hands absently. The cuffs had left faint red marks on her wrists, but she paid them no mind. Her focus was forward, on the moment ahead, on the moment when the truth would no longer be hidden.